Good evening, everybody. Welcome. So my name's John Whittle. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Information Technology at Monash University. And it's my great pleasure this evening to welcome you to the latest in our Dean's Seminar Series. Before we get going, I'd just like to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land we are gathered today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. So for those that are here at this series for the first time, this is a regular series of events that we hold from the Faculty of IT at Monash, where we try to take kind of key hot topics of the day and debate them in more of an open forum. And I think you'll all agree that there's probably no hotter topic today than the integration of ethics and AI. So I'm very pleased to say that we've got an absolutely amazing lineup of people tonight who are going to debate with you some of these key ethical questions around AI. I would ask, if you don't mind, to turn your phones off. We are filming and we don't want any of that to be picked up. So I'll first of all introduce our facilitator for the night, and that is Kylie Ahern. So Kylie Ahern is an award-winning publisher and entrepreneur. She was the co-founder of Cosmos magazine, and she's built it up to be the #1 science magazine and website in the country. She helped establish the Nature Publishing Group team and their strategy for the Australian and New Zealand market, and created a global education strategy for Scientific American. Cosmos Media has been recognized with 54 awards and commendations for the high quality of its content. And Kylie has also been responsible for educational products which have reached out to 70% of Australia's high schools and more than 130,000 students. So it's a great pleasure that we've got Kylie to facilitate the discussion today. So moving on to our two discussants of the evening, two very distinguished and high-profile academics. So first is Professor Toby Walsh, who is a leading researcher in the country and internationally in artificial intelligence. The Australian newspaper has described him as a rock star of Australia's digital revolution. Hopefully he'll live up to that reputation this evening.
I'll be throwing my chair off the stage shortly.
He's been elected a Fellow of the Australian Academy of Science and has won the prestigious Humboldt Research Award, as well as the New South Wales Premier's Prize for Excellence in Engineering and ICT. In more recent years, he's become somewhat of a media darling about anything related to AI and robotics. And he has appeared on the television and radio, the ABC, the BBC, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10, CCTV, CNN, Deutsche Welle, NPR, SBS, and Voice of America. So quite a few. He's also had work appearing in The New Scientist, The American Scientist, Cosmos, and The Conversation. And his Twitter account has been voted one of the top 10 to follow to keep abreast of developments in AI. Which reminds me that we do have a Twitter hashtag for the evening, which has now disappeared, but it's #MonashInfoTech, or just #AI if you want to keep things simple. So do tweet. Joining Toby this evening, we've got one of Monash Faculty of Information Technology's own, and that is Professor Sharon Oviatt, who is director of our Human-Centered AI group. Sharon is an internationally recognized computer scientist, known primarily for her work in the field of human-computer interaction and human-centered multimodal interface design. She's the recipient of the inaugural ACM-ICMI Sustained Accomplishment Award, National Science Foundation Special Creativity Award, ACM SIG Chi Academy Award, and she's an ACM Fellow. She was founder of the ACM International Conference on Multimodal Interaction and of the series of data-driven Grand Challenge workshops on multimodal learning analytics. Both of our guests this evening are highly international, so Toby has held various research positions in England, Scotland, France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, Sweden, and of course Australia. And Sharon is equally as international, having worked at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, the University of California at Santa Cruz, the Oregon Health and Sciences University, Stanford, University of Washington, and now Monash University in Australia. So I think you'll agree that we couldn't ask for a better lineup to discuss this very important topic today. And with that, I would ask you to welcome our guests, and I will hand over to Kylie, who will facilitate the discussion this evening.
Thanks, John, and thanks to the faculty for organising this tonight, and welcome everyone. So before we get involved in this conversation, I'll just set the scene. Popular culture has been imagining a future where computers attain sentience and take over the world, largely not to our benefit, for many decades. We've pondered the implications, we've queried what it is to be human, to be sentient, and we've debated how to treat this new intelligence. From Arthur C. Clarke's style F for Frankenstein, his supercomputer HAL, to Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, and the more recent disturbing musings of Black Mirror. Doctor Who, The Terminator, Battlestar Galactica, Robocop, Omnius, Matrix, iRobot, the Millennial Man. We've been enthralled, challenged, and a little bit terrified at times about what we have developed, or we're developing. But as we all know, artificial intelligence is not just about robots or a dystopian future. And it's certainly not in the near or distant future. It's here with us now via Alexa, Siri, SatNav, and in ways that we don't even realise. It's optimising food resources and helping deliver better diagnoses in medicine. The technology advances are galloping at a massive speed, and discussion has moved from the science fiction into the public arena. We've got our world-leading experts in AI and technology leaders warning of the digital, physical and political threats that AI pose, and the need to develop ethical frameworks around AI research development. Closer to home for many of us is the impact of AI on our jobs, for better and for worse. And this week we've seen the new AI newsreader coming out from China. Amazon has over 100,000 warehouse robots, and autonomous vehicles are being anticipated rather than speculated upon. There are still hurdles to overcome. How will autonomous vehicles know when to take us to emergency, for example? So while researchers have been looking at AI for decades, our society is only just beginning to wake up to the opportunities and threats and challenges. So our policymakers have a massive challenge on their hands. They not only need to understand the potential of AI to ensure we remain globally competitive, but they need to protect us and invest in the research. In July this year, Dr. Alan Finkel, our chief scientist, has cautioned that companies and corporations cannot just be left to their own devices to come up with individual interpretations for the ethical uses of technology. So that leads us to our conversation with Toby and Sharon tonight. And I guess we'll start with definitions. So we've heard that AI will be one day as ubiquitous as electricity is in our lives. But what is actually artificial intelligence? And whilst you're talking about that, what is deep learning and machine learning? So Sharon, do you want to kick off?
And intelligence is that quality that enables an entity to function appropriately and with foresight in its environment. I might add, I think that AI aims to, in many respects, simulate various aspects of human intelligence as we know it, so computers can function in a more flexibly adaptive and intelligent way in different domains. And it, of course, as most people here realize, is increasingly permeating most areas of computation. My own field started out as HCI. It has really transformed, I would say, in the last 5 years, because HCI and AI have effectively merged. So I am now considered to be doing human-centered AI. And it is enabling not only more complex autonomous functioning, and we all know about self-driving cars, but also more human-like interaction with users. And by that I mean everything from emotion recognition to better diagnostics about your state of health or mental health. And in that regard, I guess you could say that machines are starting to know as much or more about us in some regards, and they are being recognized now as very powerful agents for us to look at our own data and self-reflect on how we might want to change our lives, whether it's our physical activity patterns or what have you. So that's a little background. I think AI, of course, it's, definitions are maybe not the best way to talk about a technology that's changing as rapidly and profoundly before our eyes. So of course, it will be what we make of it.
I couldn't really improve upon that definition, but I do like that this definition that AI is all the things we can't yet do with a computer.
Nice.
Which does bring out two things. One is that it's a moving target. It will constantly change. And then the other thing that I think is really important for people to understand is it's not one thing. It's actually today, AI is a collection of technologies that do things like understand speech, understand text, understand data. It's a collection, it's a grab bag of things that we're trying to build together that will help us do things that humans require intelligence to do.
Okay, so my question around AI, machine learning and deep learning. Can you tell us a bit about machine learning?
And machine learning is one of those tools. It's built upon the very simple idea that much of our intelligence isn't things that we were born with. We couldn't speak, we couldn't write, we couldn't read. We learned all those things, and maybe we can give the ability to machines to learn from data like we learn from data. And that's one aspect of our intelligence that we're actually getting machines to do. And within the field of machine learning, there's a very special type of machine learning called deep learning that's having particular success at the moment. Many of the things that you read about today are successes. Deep learning playing Go, deep learning taking over Google Translate, where we've taken lots of data and used an architecture that's somewhat modeled on the human brain, but in a very simple, very abstract way. It's not actually very deep. It's not learning in the beautiful way the human brain learns, because we can learn from single examples. It's learning from millions of examples. But nevertheless, it's inspired in some respects by the neural network that is on our brain and building something that's computational in a similar respect.
Okay.
But that's only one small part of AI. And even the father of deep learning, the founders of deep learning will say deep learning is probably not going to solve intelligence. There's much more to intelligence than deep learning, and we'll need many other things. We don't have a deep understanding of language. Machines don't understand language like humans do. Mm-hmm. If you say, he was pregnant, so Google Translate will translate that into French or German or any other language without blinking, without thinking there's something deeply disturbing about the idea that he was pregnant. Because it's understanding it at a surface level, a very statistical level of words. It's not understanding the deep meaning of the words. And that pregnancy is not something that men typically do.
But it's only a matter of time.
The men are pregnant?
No. Well, maybe with artificial intelligence, but...
well, I'm sure women will be pleased to know it's only a matter of time. It's only fair we took our fair share of the burden after a few millennia.
I agree with that. Okay.
It's only a matter of time before machines are...
Understanding that that's absolutely incorrect, that statement. And
2062.
2062. All right, talk to us about... Okay. So let's digress to 2062. You've written this book recently. What's going to happen in 2062?
Yes, my new book is called 2062, so unashamed advert for you there. And it was titled 2062 for two reasons. One that was subconscious, one that was conscious. The conscious reason was that I surveyed 300 of my colleagues, and that was the median estimate of when machines will be as capable as humans.
Right.
The average estimate, the arithmetic average, was never. 8% of them said never, but most of them, 92%, said it would happen, and there was a huge variation. So don't worry, it's not going to happen on June the 3rd at 4 p.m. on 2062. There was a huge variation, but 50% said before 2062 and 50% said after 2062. I mean, what you can take away is it's not going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years. It's probably not going to happen in 1,000 years. It's probably in the next 50 or 100 years.
Right.
But there's a huge uncertainty, huge amounts that we've still got to go. So that was the conscious reason. The subconscious reason, which was really spooky, was after I finished writing the book, I was explaining to my daughter what the book was about, and she's 8. And I said to her, well, it's about the world you'll inherit, the world that, you know, our children will inherit. And then I did the maths, and the book was already being printed, and she would be exactly my age to the year 2062.
Oh, wow.
So it's very much, I see the book as the world that our children get to inherit.
Yeah, well, I calculated it. I'll be in my 90s, so hopefully. So before we get to ethics, I'd like to understand how AI is benefiting us now. Like we often ponder on the futuristic. We've mentioned Siri and Alexa. What's happening right now that everyone can think about in terms of their lives?
Well, there are a lot of areas where it's benefiting us now. I think some of the ones that are more commonly cited are, you know, object and speech recognition applied to areas like medical diagnostics. The most common example that's cited is skin cancer detection, that there is technology that is about as capable as a team of dermatologists, professional board-certified dermatologists, in spotting skin cancers.
Can we access that now, that skin cancer diagnosis? I mean, right now I go to my dermatologist who's checking me out, but where do you get
it's pretty
this?
applicable to Australians, I know. I don't know the exact commercial state of it now. I could certainly imagine that instead of getting a second opinion in the future, you might have both a doctor and a machine capability double check one another and see if they have the same conclusion, but maybe Toby knows how it's being used.
I'm not sure if there is an app. I mean, it's worth realizing why a computer program will ultimately be much better than any dermatologist, because ultimately it will see more examples than any dermatologist could see in a lifetime. So it will see millions and millions of examples. It will see the most obscure types of skin cancers that a dermatologist might only see once or never in a lifetime of practicing. And that's one reason why computers have the potential to be better at doing these, certainly these perception tasks than humans ever can be. The good example I like to give people of where AI is in our lives without reasoning is actually from the 70s. So your satellite navigation system in your car, Google Maps, every time that you've taken directions from a computer, that was a robot navigation algorithm based upon an algorithm that actually has a name. It's called A-star search. It was developed for Shaky the robot in the 70s. Oh. The first fully autonomous robot, the first robot that tried to sense the world, make decisions about where to go. They needed to give that an algorithm so that they could say, go to the library, get me a book from the library, had to work out how to navigate through the building, so they wrote an algorithm to do that. That algorithm now has been repositioned to navigate humans. Right. So we're actually navigating humans with a robot algorithm, turning humans into robots.
Fascinating.
And of course, the other really commonly cited one is games. Whether it's chess or Go or poker or what have you. There are some others, though, where the literature has started to publish findings. For example, humans are really very poor at detecting deception in other humans. And there's been some multimodal analytics research that is tracking both speech signal, physical activity patterns, and so forth, that has been shown to be more capable than a human. And there's also some data from basically legal recordings where they have the text, the audio, and the visual of a legal proceeding, and the ground truth is the outcome of whether the person is convicted or not, which is, I suppose, a reasonable estimate, not perfect. And some published papers showing that machine learning capabilities, AI techniques, are on average about 20% better in some of these cases. One problem with humans is that we have a truth bias for third-party reports. So in social media, if someone basically provides a review in some form that something is the case, you're going to be biased towards believing that, whereas deception detection run over that same data is, again, more likely than a human to recognize it as false. So there's some areas, I think, so the goal here is superhuman performance, but you have to realize that, you know, progress towards superhuman AI capabilities will be spotty, and we're more likely to see it in areas where humans are especially weak. So if we're really weak at deception detection, that's an opportunity to try and develop a system. And I wanted to add, in terms of machine learning and deep learning techniques, that I view them as only accelerating tools for accomplishing AI goals. And they are limited to certain data sources currently. So, you know, whether it's text or audio and visual combinations, a lot of the work that I do is multimodal, multi-sensor, where we're starting to combine biosignals, brain-computer interaction, with human communication signals, speech, image processing, and so forth. And there aren't good machine learning tools yet for combining beyond bimodal and actually doing, so there's a lot more work to be done in enabling tools in order to build the kind of systems we might like.
Okay. You mentioned their bias. So we think about people within technology, it's dominated by men. There's a huge discussion right now around getting more women into technology, more women studying engineering. But right now, AI is being, the majority of people in AI, I assume, based on the stats around technology and engineering, are men. And of particular, how do we make sure the bias is removed and that we're not ensuring this cultural paradigm that we've currently got in our society? And what are the risks that...
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. And it raises one issue that I should start with, which is AI technology is not just about computation and engineering. It's an extremely multidisciplinary field. So a lot of the concepts that have been introduced have come from other fields entirely: psychology, cognitive science, law, you know, the legal profession. There are a variety of very different professions that will be involved in developing future AI capabilities that are, especially ones that are more complex and ethical. And, you know, we see things moving too from this, you know, originally fairly narrow definition, which is more engineering dominant, of building something that is fully automated, to now people talking a lot more in a more nuanced way about, no, how can we build human AI systems, synergistic systems that leverage the strengths of human judgment and reasoning, and the strengths of machine learning, which may be tracking, you know, 20 different data sources longitudinally over 2 years, which no human can focus on more than a finite amount of data. They can't maintain that vigilance. So very, very different human and computer strengths. So I think one of the things I see is the direction moving towards more synergistic human AI systems.
You're right, it's a problem. I mean, it even has an official name. It's called the Sea of Dudes problem. And unfortunately, it's getting worse. It was a few years where the participation rate of women was increasing. We were getting more women coming to study AI, but that's actually gone backwards the last couple of years, which is a terrible pity for the field. It's a terrible struggle for the field in terms of trying to make the technology unbiased and inclusive. And we have a huge amount of work to deal with that. And also, you know, there's a huge shortage of people, and if we're actually turning away half of the people, that would, you know, a good way to deal with that would be to try and make the field more inclusive. And there's plenty of challenging examples of how we had a couple of weeks ago, Amazon built a machine learning system to search through people's CVs and to help them with hiring, and they actually just had to, of course they did include sex as one of the inputs, We didn't want it to be sexist by continuing to hire men because they'd hired men in the past. But they discovered that the program didn't have any common sense and therefore implicitly learned some biases. It hired people who did football and who didn't do hockey. And so it was completely sexist, and so they actually just threw it out and started again because they decided there was no way to repair it. Because, and this is one of the important things, it's not just the people in the field, it's the data. And we're training things on historical data, and because of various reasons, societal reasons, the data has some historical bias, and the machine will learn that bias unless we're very careful. And it will bake in that historical bias that we've spent the last 50 or 100 years trying to get us out of our society to make it a fairer society, less sexist, less racist, less ageist, all those things that we've been trying to get out. And because we train in historical data, that captures that societal racism and sexism that's happened in the past, that will be perpetuated unless we are incredibly careful to make sure that it isn't perpetuated by an algorithm. And then the worst thing is today, most of these algorithms are black boxes, so we can't actually inspect them to find out that they are necessarily biased or to explain their decisions.
One of the things that's promising in terms of gender representation designing AI systems is that historically women have been very attracted to multidisciplinary areas like HCI, natural language processing, bioinformatics, and actually quite a few women in robotics and so forth. And so as we start defining AI in a more multidisciplinary, comprehensive way, and also talking about societal impact and legal issues and policy and so forth, there should be broader representation than the narrow engineering profile. And in terms of debiasing, I would add, I think one of the games now is to really understand that every expert human, whether it's a doctor or a teacher, has human biases, all right? And we know that AI systems have a different source of biases. So the game now really becomes to imagine strategies where we design, again, these synergistic human AI systems where the strengths of each agent prevail and their weaknesses are circumvented by the other system. So if humans aren't good at tracking n data sources over 2 years, fine, have the system do that. And, so there's opportunity for designing superhuman systems that actually exhibit less bias than either expert humans or expert systems. So that's an example of a very promising direction.
Okay.
I should say, ladies and gentlemen, we should apologize that Silicon Valley 20 years ago sold you a lie, which was that algorithms were unbiased, because various tech companies didn't want to take responsibility for their search results, and we're discovering quite what a lie that was. But as you say, there's every potential to deal with all of the terrible behavioral biases that humans have and actually end up in a fairer world, because humans are terrible at making it.
But we've got to be motivated to do that.
We have, but behavioral psychology is full of a catalogue of examples about how we make irrational decisions, about how biased our decision-making is and how post hoc we actually justify our decision-making. And we have a potential to make fairer, more evidence-driven decisions if we're careful in using algorithms to help us do that.
Okay. So talk to us about what's going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years. How will, 15 years ago, who would have thought about the impact of smartphones, not just in terms of our work life, but our behaviours? What's the potential for AI? What industries will it be disrupting? I know you've mentioned that it'll probably disrupt everything that we do. What's the world going to be like in the next 10 to 15 years? Is it too speculative to ask that question, even?
Well, I think AI is increasingly permeating everything. It, of course, is very difficult to predict 10 years out the net effect. It's clear that there are several things that are very clear. One is we really need to ramp up international and every citizen education about AI and to become, as we are with all technologies, just a lot more critical rather than accepting. It's not the case that all technology is good for you. We all know, You know, in the current world, large corporations are developing AI. It is predatory in many, many different ways. It is addictive in many different ways. This includes in kind of fairly hair-raising applications. I mean, I've spent a lot of time studying educational technologies, and they also are addictive, and you know, addiction directly competes with learning at a neuropsychological level. So the last thing you want is technology like that in the schools, technology that is eliminating students' ability to focus, that is causing them to constantly do low-level repetitive actions that are addictive, that compete with their ability to learn. So we really need to be much more discriminating and aware about when to use technology, including AI technology, when to just say no and not answer that cell phone when you're driving in the car, which for some reason is so difficult for many people to inhibit using technology in inappropriate contexts. And we need to just be a lot more critical about what it's doing to our lives, in some cases competing with our most intimate, valued social relationships and disrupting them, and in other cases, disrupting students' ability to learn. And there's a lot that is present now. We don't have to wait 10 years to find the problems.
Yeah.
I'd agree. I mean, we were just talking about how terrible human decision-making was. And part of the problem is that we're discovering that with lots of data, we can actually, corporations can take advantage of that and can make us make decisions and do things that aren't in our best interests, and exploit the fact that our decision-making is not very rational, is not very, and not necessarily going to help us, and exploiting that. So that's something we have to really take care of. But you know, I'd like to be. I'm a glass half full person, so I do like to be optimistic. And we will see, for example, fully autonomous cars. Most of the major car manufacturers claim to be selling fully autonomous cars by 2025. That's in 7 years' time. Level 5 full autonomy, and that also means we'll have flying cars. People always ask me, you know, we never got the future we were promised, because where are the flying cars?
And we never got the jetpacks.
And we never got the jetpacks. Well, I'm not sure about the jetpacks, but the flying cars we will have in 10 years' time. Two of my colleagues are actually CEOs of companies that are building flying cars, Kitty Hawk, I can't remember the name of the other one.
We don't hear a lot about that in the press, though, do we, about the flying? We hear autonomous vehicles.
They're trialling autonomous flying taxis in Dubai.
Right.
And there was in the newspaper today about how they're going to have Uber is going to prototype autonomous taxis here in Australia. And the reason we didn't have them before now is that we didn't have autonomy. Because frankly, you know, humans aren't any good at flying. And most of us couldn't fly. You have to be specially trained. So we couldn't have flying cars till we could have autonomous cars.
Right.
And the cars could drive themselves or fly themselves. Now we're getting to the point where we have autonomy. We can actually let the flying cars loose. So it's only a matter of time.
Is there a future where we will not be driving, basically?
I hope so. I hate driving.
Yep.
Waste of time.
I agree with you. And
time.
parking's
dangerous.
worse. Yes.
Dangerous as well. 1,000 people would die on the roads of Australia. Young people can't drive, don't have mobility. Old people don't have mobility. Handicapped people don't have mobility. All of that will change our society in a profoundly good way. Not good news if you're a taxi driver or a truck driver, but for most of us, it's profoundly good news that will open up our cities and change. If you think, you know, the current city was defined by the automobile, certainly in the United States, and to a large extent, many of our capital cities. The autonomous automobile will completely redefine the nature of our city, about not just parking, but about the nature of work and about the nature of mobility. It will be, I like to say to people, think about 1950. If you went to the streets of Melbourne in 1950, it'd be the same as today. There's trams and cars and bicycles. It looks pretty much like today. Go back 50 years to 1900, and it was horse and cart. In those 50 years, the world changed, and it looks very, very different. And it's the same between 2050 and 2000. You'll look back at 2000 and say, people were driving cars.
Yeah.
Whoa.
It'll be interesting to see what the business model is. Obviously, we won't own these autonomous vehicles. It'll be
something we rent? Or
No, we won't, because millennials don't like buying things. They like buying subscriptions.
Yep.
And why would you spend second largest purchase of your life, invest all that capital in something that sits there slowly rusting on the side of the road when you can buy timeshare in some super Uber service and someone else repairs it. You can go and drink and party and it's waiting for you whenever you need it. Much more convenient.
I'm going to temper that a little bit. I, as an assessment person, from the viewpoint of ethical AI, think that it's great that we're moving towards autonomous vehicle, but they're being developed primarily by corporations. And we are not being shown data on performance. There's not publicly available data showing us the accident rates and so forth. So it's proprietary data held by companies. What we need to have is government and public access to data so that instead of having a car company tell me, oh yeah, buy this autonomous vehicle, you'll love it. When you're drunk, it'll drive much better than you. And I'm thinking, look, maybe I think after driving for 30 years, then I'm in the top 10% of drivers. And does it drive better than that? Exactly, or is it just drive better than the average person? Exactly what are the data on that? And I don't particularly want to engage in coercive dialogues with people about their proprietary secret data. I want to see the data, and I think people deserve to make their own decisions whether or not they do or don't want to use autonomous vehicles and in what kind of context, because we're all individuals. We're entitled to think for ourselves, not be forced by the corporate world into kind of group think. And I don't think coercion is the way to go. So we need more public data on evaluation.
But do you think the public should be allowed even to decide? So
I think individuals certainly should be entitled to decide whether they use or ride in. That's freedom of choice. Otherwise, we're saying AI is going to eliminate freedom of choice.
No, I'm saying should we, for example, we don't know that autonomous cars are safer than humans yet. So should we even allow them on the roads?
Well, that's a discussion we should have. Now, some of us who are really interested in interface design, every time there's an accident, we go to our friends who are experts, we find out exactly what was the glitch this time. And, we have our own opinions about that. But I don't even think that the experts, should be the ones that hold that as some kind of secret. It should be available to individuals to understand and be part of their education.
But I agree totally that this is being done in commercial secrecy, and we need to know that, for example, that they're safer. But there's an interesting ethical question then, which is, how much safer do they need to be? I mean, there's a moral argument that as soon as they're epsilon safer than humans, we should ban all humans and only let autonomous cars drive. But I don't think as a society we're ready for that. So should they be 10 times safer, 100 times safer? I mean, they're never going to be perfect because random stuff happens. Trees fall down, shit happens. But it's, as a society, we're going to have to make a decision. What is the level of safety that we are comfortable with?
And that's a good question. But if you leave it to companies and they maintain proprietary data, they'll say, it's good enough for me to sell it to you. I'm done. And I'm going to say, oh, but I'm an iterative design person. I want to see the data. I want to know what percentage of fatalities are there. I want to diagnose and find out, do an error analysis. Exactly why did that occur? And then I want to have a dialogue about how can you, company, improve that to make it better. So I'm going to push really hard back on these suckers and say, I want to see the data. I want to see you iterate it and make it better.
But to go back again, I don't think this is just a job for the consumer. This is where government, again, is letting us down. Yes. Right? Because we have expectations that governments look after ourselves and make sure. And as a good example I give to people is the aviation industry. So 100 years ago, it was terribly dangerous to fly. Planes fell out of the sky all the time. You wouldn't want to get in an aeroplane. Now it's the safest form of travel by various measures. You're more likely to die driving to the airport than you are flying from the airport. And it got that way because it was heavily regulated by government, and accidents were investigated, data was shared, experiences were shared across the industry, and it's now, and that's the sort of model I suspect we need for autonomous cars, one that we're not seeing at the moment because it's just competition to see who's going to be the first to sell these autonomous cars.
So you're in government, and there's a lot to understand from a government point of view. What are we not doing right now? What do we need to be doing? Put aside the issue of investment in the research, we'll come to that, but what's the sort of frameworks that we're missing right now that we should be focused on? Obviously, you're talking about data and privacy and open access. What else needs to...
Oh, gee, well, I mean, there are a lot of future directions. One is, I mean, one of the things that I'm most troubled by is the lack of public literacy at a deeper level to understand and think critically and independently about technology in general, but AI in particular. And there's so much hype that I really have a lot of concern about people being coerced into using it, not understanding how it really works and so forth. So I think education is huge. I think another major issue is that although people are talking about the speed of transformation due to AI, technology change still takes a long time to get it right. So sometimes we have funders who think, oh yeah, you know, I'll give you a 3-year project and this problem should be solved. It's like, no, you know, I mean, some of us who worked on, for example, in the bad old days, human interfaces used to be always keyboard input and graphics output. And I think it was about 1992 that I put in my first grant looking at a multimodal interface where people would speak and write to a system. Well, you know, it's been over 25 years of evolution, and it was only 10 years ago that the dominant interface on smartphones and watches and other devices actually switched to becoming multimodal enabled. So these transformations take longer than you think. There needs to be more education and more long-term public funding for this kind of work. That's one issue.
I think we have to think about more regulation of the tech companies. They brought, you know, amazing, useful disruption into our lives, changed the world for better, but not all of that disruption has been beneficial. And I haven't checked their share prices today, but it used to be that the 5 biggest companies by market cap on the planet today were all technology companies. Amazon, Apple, Alphabet, Alibaba, Facebook, Microsoft. That's 6 companies. It was 6 companies once, but they are now as valuable as small countries and as powerful as small countries. And we're discovering that, you know, a lot of that power rests in the fact that they are data monopolies, that there is no competition to Facebook except in China, where they regulated that there would be. There's no competition essentially to Google except in China, where they regulated that there would be. And we've had amazing period of disruption and change, which has been great. But there's worrying signs that actually will be stalled by the fact that it's now impossible to compete against these companies because you don't have the resources, you don't have the data, you don't have the money. They can buy any competitor out of business.
So regulation won't necessarily, you can't do regulation for competition at this point in time?
Well, but we always had. So we had to regulate big oil, we had to regulate the big banks, big pharma, big tobacco. Whenever businesses get too big, the free market works, but only when it's regulated appropriately so that it aligns with the public good. And it's no longer clear that it's necessarily aligned completely with the public good. And we do have to say, well, maybe we do have to push back about some of these things. And, for example, make sure that Facebook, which is now the largest media platform on the planet, is held accountable for the information that they spread around the planet, as much as we hold accountable the ABC.
So, but
because we're realizing that can change how people vote, that can change the government you have. You only have to look at the troubled political situation you have in the United States, the troubled political situation that you have in the UK, to see where you may end up if you're not careful. If you don't take responsibility
So we haven't been terribly successful at that yet, and we certainly are struggling to get these big multinationals just to do basic things like pay the appropriate amount of tax. So how do you get them?
We regulated them in the Industrial Revolution. We regulated the robber barons, as they were called, to make sure that all of us shared the benefits, and all of us did share the benefits. Life expectancy has doubled in Australia.
So you're saying we've got to learn a lot from history. We've got to remember all what we did in the past in order to, going back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
We can't just sit on our hands and expect all of the disruption is going to be good, when that we can let disruption happen without trying to regulate it so it actually makes sure that all of us share the benefits.
I think there are lots of ways to misuse any amazing technology. There are some, of course, alarming things about lack of regulation. One is the huge lag. That there can be years and years that go by when something is introduced and used in a dangerous way before people actually come to consensus and do something to regulate it. This week, I was sitting reading, for those of you really interested in AI, I highly recommend a couple of different sources. One is the 100-year study on AI, another is the AI Index, and another is ACM Tech News. Well, ACM is the big international computer science organization worldwide. So I was opening, they have 3 times a week you get this newsletter, and there's a lot of really fascinating stuff reported. So it's a whole lot more interesting than just reading the paper or something. And I open it, and here's an example. So some friends of mine at UC Santa Barbara had demonstrated that you can take Wi-Fi on a smartphone and walk back and forth past a building and detect whether someone's inside or not. So great, Toby's not home today. I think I'll burglarize his house. And they were demonstrating this, but now we can watch how many years go by before there's any effective regulation of that. I think, though, for regulation, realize that it's not the AI technology per se that's the problem. In any technology, we're talking about human use of technology, so effectively a human-computer interaction. And it's often the human behavioral phenomena that cause the problem. So people will think, and we're not, engineers aren't trained to do that. This is why we need multidisciplinary research that understands what humans are thinking and what their incentive systems are and how they're going to misuse something. Right now, AI technology, clearly, we have a huge problem with AI technology being used to control people. I find this very disturbing. Yes, there are manifestations like propaganda. There are manifestations like use by totalitarian regimes to surveil and treat their citizens punitively. There's a lot of hideous stuff starting to go on. These are human behavioral problems, which we need to get a grip on, which is why we need better quality multidisciplinary work really fast. The other really big, I think regulation and policy formation need to think of what are the really big themes that are the most disturbing. That's one. Another one that is being much discussed right now is AI increasingly kind of dividing the haves from the have-nots, and that the future could well hold, a very small percentage of people who are inventing and using technologies. And I think we need to have policies and think ahead creatively about that. Not too long ago, opened the paper and there were people in the Bay Area. Bay Area happens to have the biggest homeless problem right now in the US, where they've developed a new project called Project Tenderloin, and they're taking homeless people and training them in AI. Now, how effective this will be, I don't know, but the whole idea is, okay, we've created this divide, now let's grab the bull by the horns and figure out how we are going to aggressively do something about it. And so, there are things like that we're really going to need to have public dialogue, some policy formation, and realize that, sure, I look at, here's an example, it's not only in the stock market, but The other day I was reading about people developing AI technology so that a very small number, maybe 1% of high-level investors, can use this technology to buy up the most promising investment rental homes all across the United States, okay? So they're looking for things that are undervalued, that are maybe in areas where public transit's gonna go in. You know, they've got their formulas with a million features. And these folks are buying up all the best rental properties. And I'm turning to my husband going, well, no wonder we can't find anything valuable. You know, somebody's beating us to the punch. So again, the haves, you know, these are opportunities that folks who've developed AI technology for purposes like this, sell them at a high price to only the most entitled, will fuel this kind of divide. You know it will happen. Okay, so we need regulation to deal with things like that.
I hate to say that Project Tenderloin sounds like a typical Silicon Valley answer to a problem, which is take homeless people, give them some mental health care, which is why most people are homeless, is because you haven't given them proper mental health care. It's probably not teaching them AI that they need. They need some proper support within the community that allowed them to slip through between the cracks, and that's, you know, typical Silicon Valley way of solving the problem. But I agree with almost everything you say, and ultimately we're discovering these technologies are rather morally neutral, and it's how we decide to use them. And as the best example I like to give people is face recognition. So face recognition is being used in China to suppress religious minorities. It's going to be used in Australia, yes. And we should be very worried about the potential impacts that it's going to have on our human rights. Equally, there are a number of police forces around the world that are using it to stop child trafficking. An immense evil in our planet. You can only scan the faces on the internet with face recognition. So the same technology being used to tackle a real evil and also to actually do evil.
Okay. So we're about to open up to questions, but just before we do, apart from flying cars, what excites you the most, and just very quickly, 30 seconds each, what excites you the most in terms of, we've talked about a lot of things tonight, but the potential of AI for Australia, and I know that's probably in a global context as well, but particularly for Australia?
Well, I'm particularly interested in some of the medical diagnostics, but my view of that is that we're going to see a transition over the next decade or so from hospitals and clinics to more and more developing AI-type capabilities on end-user devices. They may be cell phones, they may be watches, where people can collect and reflect upon their own data of various kinds. And in some cases that will inspire, it can be a very powerful way to inspire behavior change, not in everyone, but an awful lot of people. And the challenges there are cybersecurity, privacy-preserving technologies to make it possible to transmit, in some cases, extremely intimate personal data about yourself in a secure way. So AI and cybersecurity need to get married really fast so that we can develop better mobile devices for this kind of end-user direction. And of course, we're already seeing that in, Apple's development of its watch is very focused on health-related activities. It takes a while to get the algorithms to be at all reliable, but now they're moving into more cardiac care and so forth. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. There's enormous interest in that. What's that about? Well, it's partly about giving end users more control over understanding and self-regulating their own health care. So that could, yes, it could bring costs down. It could result in better education and motivation to preserve healthcare and a lot of other things. So I'm really excited about that.
Toby?
I got to agree with that, but I just want to apologize to the young people in the room because we've just leaving the planet with these wicked problems like climate change, the global financial crisis that will never end, asset price bubbles, increasing inequality. So just terrible problems. I apologize. And our only hope is if we actually embrace technologies like AI to try and use the world in a more sustainable way, to try and increase our prosperity, to try and increase our life expectancy, because frankly, we've got no other hands of card to play. I'm confident the technology will get us through. I'm just apologize for the bumpy road ahead, sorry.
Thanks, Toby. Okay, so we've got question time. Have we got a roaming microphone? And does someone want to take my microphone and...
Thank you. Thank you to the panel for some enlightening discussions. I'd like to take us to a darker place, if you may.
It wasn't dark enough for you then.
So AI and military applications have been deeply intertwined since the inception of AI. And there's probably people in this room who are doing research into applications that have military applications. So in the near foreseeable future, war is likely to be conducted with robots. Where are we are we ever likely to have the ethical discussion about when robots can shoot humans?
Thank you for the question. I mean, it's something that I've become an accidental activist about, that we will be handing over decisions to machines about who lives and dies. I should point out, there's plenty of good things. The US military has always been the greatest funder of AI research. And there's plenty of good things that AI can do to save people's lives, like clearing minefield, perfect job for a robot. But actually handing over that decision to machines as to ultimately who lives and who dies is crossing a moral line that we should, I believe, never cross. I've spoken 5 times at the United Nations on this topic. The United Nations is seriously discussing this issue. 26 nations have called for a preemptive ban. Most recently, last month, the European Parliament voted for that. And I'm ashamed to say Australia is not one of those 26 nations. In fact, Australia is actually hampering the discussions, which is a shame on us because we have led the way in disarmament talks in many other areas, in biological weapons, in chemical weapons, but in this case, we are towing the US line and holding back the possibility of the world becoming a better place by deciding this is a technology that should be used to make people live longer, not used to make people die.
Right, next question. Sorry, are you handing up the mic down there, right? Sorry, we've got a few questions, sorry.
Hi, so we've heard about deep learning, so it's over here. It's just one part of the AI, and we've heard about the data in deep learning and the actual training affecting the ethics of the outcomes of deep learning. But what about other AI algorithms? So we've heard about other applications. What about other AI algorithms, and what about the ethics associated with those ones?
Well, I'm not sure exactly which part you want to talk about, but we've mentioned that, of course, algorithms, just like expert humans, are biased, and they're biased based on the data that they are trained on. I think one of the big problems, of course, with the development of AI technology, one of the biggest bottlenecks is access to good quality data. And unfortunately, good quality data doesn't just mean more data. There are a lot of people with very simplistic views about data demands. And some of the stuff that people in the field are working on, they're trying to develop what's considered more deeply human-centered design, where they're attempting to recognize and contextualize technology development to accommodate human emotional status or something about their cognition, their state of learning in a certain domain or what have you. And in these areas, there's a real need to have data that's well matched with the prediction task. So it turns out language technologies, language directly mediates thought. If you want to know something about human cognition, examination of human language is a great way to gain a kind of lucid window. So I think there's a lot more that needs to be discussed about how you train and develop good quality AI systems. And some of that has to do with what does it mean to have good quality and well-matched data for the prediction task. The other thing that we talked about earlier was bias and how to reduce bias in algorithms. Well, again, the algorithms depend on the data that you've trained them on, but we know human experts are biased as well, and there the game becomes how do you strategize complementary human AI system capabilities so that the biases of each are, the net bias is minimized. But you may have other specific concerns in mind?
Mark, thanks for the question, because I think it's a good question, because it points out that it's not just data that we need to be worried about. We need to be worried about that people write the right objective to their algorithms. We already see that with Facebook, that the objective is to maximize the amount of time that you spend clicking on things, and that's not an objective that actually lines up with societal good. We see that with many other examples. It's not just about making sure that we have unbiased data or that the predictions are unbiased, but it's even, what are the objectives that we're trying to optimize? How do they interact with the complex system that society is? And maybe we're not actually measuring the right thing to be optimizing. And we see many examples of there are lots of subtle things that we're discovering, that when we give the decision to machines that humans used to make, we have to make sure that those are decisions that line up with human values.
Hi, I was wondering whether the panel could speak to the question of the greater good and the greater bad of AI systems. And to give you a context for that, if you look at two of the biggest advocates of ethical AI, the most high-profile ones, it's Elon Musk and Demis Hassabis. One is presiding over a company writing software which will absolutely make decisions which lead to human deaths, but autonomous cars are clearly for the greater good, and there's a good argument for that. The latter, Demis Hassabis, led a team which wrote software which beat the world champion Go player, which was basically the abject humiliation of a national treasure. And as far as I can tell, no one checked whether Lee Sedol was a suicide risk. So given the...
They paid him a couple of million. I think that may have helped.
Sure, but if you read what he said, he took it very hard. He took it on behalf of the whole human race.
Gary Kasparov spent years in therapy.
Exactly.
And is only just coming out of it now, I think.
So given the mixed messages and unintended consequences, can we really know what is an evil use of AI and what isn't an evil use of AI? And is it all kind of just halting progress a little bit?
Well, Simon, I think the interesting part of your question is that a large part of the technology is being developed by corporations. It's not being developed in public universities. It's not necessarily being developed for the public good. And it's, corporations have their own goals, which are not necessarily aligned with those of society. And we have to worry about where that may take us.
And that just comes back to the general theme, I think, that was raised earlier, that AI technology needs to be developed to support human goals, activities, and values. And of course, it isn't a human goal to live a purposeless life. So we don't particularly want to simply be replaced and given a little check once a month and told to go away.
Thank you. So back to AI and weapons. So now malware and possibly cyber warfare targets ATMs or locks PCs for ransom. So what about the self-driving cars? Now we're all happy to have them, but like instead of ATMs being locked in one country or PCs for ransom, imagine people locked up in their self-driving cars and someone is controlling them. Am I crazy? Am I the only one frightened of these?
No, you're not crazy at all. We should very much worry about the cybersecurity of all these devices, especially autonomous cars. And people are going to have to get much more serious about building in safeguards into these systems, which are frankly not built properly today. There are not the safeguards built in because there are huge, great potential risks. On the other hand, let me point out that we do have a terrorist weapon today that autonomous cars will take away from us, which is today anyone can go and rent a truck and turn it into a weapon of terror. That will stop in about 10 years' time because autonomous cars and autonomous trucks will just stop when you try to drive them at people. And so that weapon, unless you know how to hack that system, and hopefully they put the safeguards in so it can't be hacked, will disappear. So that threat, which we cannot protect ourselves from because you can't barricade every city, every street to stop people turning vehicles into weapons, will stop because the weapons themselves, the cars, the trucks, will just stop when you drive them at people.
I'd like to follow up on that. It's Phil over here. So imagine your 2062 scenario, and I have my autonomous vehicle, and I tell it to just wait over there while I go. We have systems that can infer people's intentions and their plans, and if this vehicle, what should it do? So where are the ethical safeguards and the deontic reasoning of obligations and permissions and legal reasoning relative to the design of these vehicles or any autonomous system? Right now, our agent architectures have no ability to reason about what's obligated, what's permitted, etc. And frankly, learning is not going to help us in this regard right now since they don't do any reasoning at all.
Well, I do know what the right answer should be. I can't let you do that.
That's what it should be. Now, how do we get there?
We need more research. And then we need to decide as a society, is that the sort of society control we want in our society? Or do we want to put up with the inconvenience occasionally of people robbing banks to have the freedom of action and free will that we might be denying people?
So are we going to build systems that have agent architectures that are required to have this kind of reasoning in them?
I imagine we will, yeah.
Okay.
It'll be an interesting world.
I think we've got time for one more question. We've got someone down here. Sorry.
Hi. With the technology AI, human life is from here. With the technology AI, human life is getting easier. Like for everything, human is using the technology. So how does it impact on human intelligence? Like the human will stop thinking in the future, or how does it work?
That's a great question. We obviously need a lot more research and funding to look at the impact of AI technology on humans broadly. And one of the things we certainly know is that automated systems result in erosion of human skill. And that's one of the reasons that the handover problem for autonomous cars is such an intractable one, is that you can't have an autonomous vehicle for a long period of time where humans' skills erode, and they also don't have the vigilance to be, chronically watching, and then all of a sudden take over, in what, a certain number of seconds if something dangerous occurs. It's just an intractable problem. It doesn't recognize humans' cognitive predilections or skills. So we do need a lot more, I think, participatory design. When we talk about developing AI systems, we have to make decisions knowing that if we develop automated systems in certain areas, those skills will basically decline. And so it's really a public discussion. We may have different preferences. Some people really enjoy driving, and that's what they want to do. Other people really enjoy complex cognitive tasks and problem solving. They don't particularly want to be replaced in some sense. So, I mean, it's a really very interesting problem, and which I ran into first when I was working on educational interfaces, and a lot of people, in the bad old days, there's this now what's considered kind of retro tutoring systems that engaged in too much automation and usurped a lot of the mental effort required on the part of students to master something. That's not the kind of educational technology we want, for sure. But on other topics, we really need to be discussing, what skills do we think are so minor and uninteresting that we do want them automated, and what kinds of skills do we want to maintain or sharpen, and that we view as purposeful and enjoyable. And that's a very human question. It's not an engineering question.
We'll give some things up, but hopefully we'll get some new things back. And as an example I give to people is when we discovered writing, we gave up the oral tradition. We used to sit around the campfire and remember stories, and people were upset we lost that, and no one remembers stories. Well, very few people remember stories now. But we got something back, which was a much better return on investment. We got back literature. We got back stories that cross time and space, and we can read the words of Shakespeare and Wordsworth. So technologies take things away. Writing took away the oral tradition, and it gave us back literature. AI will take things away. The interesting question is, what will it give us back?
Beautiful. Well, over to you, John.
Great, thank you very much. We're going to have to wrap up there, I'm afraid, folks. But we do, I mean, there will be an opportunity for kind of networking immediately afterwards. So, you know, feel free. I'm sure there's lots more questions to come and grab Sharon and Toby and ask them in more detail. And I'd also just like, given that we've had the quote twice, I think, tonight, I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave. Of course, Douglas Rain, who was the voice of HAL, actually died in the last 24 hours. So I'd take a moment to acknowledge that. But for now, I would just like to say a huge thank you to Kylie for facilitating this event this evening, for Toby, who joins us all the way from New South Wales and is in town to give a keynote at the CIO Summit tomorrow, I believe, and also to Sharon, who didn't travel anywhere to come, but that's okay. We do have just a small gift, just some Monash branded stuff that I will give to Kylie and to Toby to thank. It's very, very small token. I'm afraid Sharon doesn't get one because she works at Monash, so she can go to the store on campus and buy one. You know? But I thought this was a really thought-provoking conversation. I mean, I've actually, I've worked. I did my PhD in an AI department a long time ago. And although I don't work directly in that field anymore, I've followed the recent developments over the years, and yet still I felt like I learned a lot from this evening's discussion. So if you could put your hands together again and give a big thank you to our speakers. Thank you. There is one final thing to me to say. There is an opportunity for you to win a prize, so that we like to collect feedback. So if you want to go to that link and fill in the event feedback survey now or soon, we'll be giving a prize out at 8 o'clock. I don't know if it's for the best filled-in survey or something, or chosen randomly. But the prize is actually a tour for you and up to 19 of your friends to tour our SensiLab facility at Caulfield at Monash, which is our kind of flagship HCI, augmented reality, virtual reality facility. It's a joint collaboration with our arts and design department. It is really quite an impressive facility. There's been multi-million dollars of investment that have gone into it, and I think people who come away from that get a glimpse of to what the future could look like, and so we're offering that tour as a kind of special incentive to fill in that survey this evening. So get those thumbs moving. All right, thank you very much.